Hey, what's up, everybody? I'm Brett Pape. That's Coach Bruce, and this is week 2 of the Coach Approach. Coach, we're here. We actually got football games to talk about. It's great to see you. Get to watch a lot of football over the weekend.
We are back, man. Yeah, I was fortunate enough I got a lot of football in this weekend. I went to a youth football game and went to my high school I coached at. I went to their game that got rained out Friday night, so they played it Saturday night. And then Sunday, my wife, God bless her, made me breakfast Sunday morning and kissed me goodbye and took my oldest daughter out shopping all day. And I got to watch as much football as I could possibly take. So it was a perfect weekend.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I had a little different experience. It was wedding weekend in the Pape family, so we had a wedding at the house. So that was a lot of fun. But Sunday was driving a few kids to the airport, so I didn't get to watch too much. But I certainly took a good look at it as soon as I can get an opportunity. And let's just kind of go into the recap. And for me, right off the bat, seeing the way Minnesota played and seeing the way Green played, I thought those were both. I thought that was a huge game as far as it relates to the NFL and how the NFC North is going to go, but also how your bold prediction last week about Justin Jefferson and just how fantasy football relates, because there's a lot of fantasy football relevant people in those two games or those two teams.
Yeah, it was. I mean, talk about a great game. I mean, I think we talked a lot about Kevin O'Connell this offseason, what he was going to mean to that Minnesota offense, and what I think that meant for Justin Jefferson, which is why I had him breaking the single season passing or receiving yards record this year, and I think he gets over 2,000 yards, and he starts out week 1 with 184. So, yeah, I mean, Green Bay looked, from the opening play of the game, they go play action. They've got Christian Watson on a go route and right through his hands, got about 7 yards of separation, and that should have been up 7-0 after the first play. And instead, Minnesota, took it to him a little bit, but what a great game to watch. I mean, I think you got Justin Jefferson's exactly what he thought he was going to be. Adam Thielen only seeing 3 targets, but was involved in high snap share. I think he was on the field for 90-something% of the snap. So I think in Minnesota, you're going to see, I think, a really good offense. And, man, talk about a guy that every year we talk about as, just his ADP is never as high as we think it should be. And year in and year out, Kirk Cousins always finds himself in the conversation. And look, in fantasy football, what he does in the playoffs, the way he does in the big games at the end of the season doesn't matter. It's all about, what you do for your fantasy team. And Kirk Cousins has definitely shown his value. And now in a Kevin O'Connell offense, it's pretty exciting.
It is pretty exciting. And I don't think he's been respected over the years. And I think from the day he was a 4th-round pick and kind of took the job from RG3, he's done nothing but perform. So Minnesota is going to be a team to reckon with throughout the whole year. Green Bay, my thoughts on it after watching is, yes, that was an awful drop by Christian Watson. But the dude did get separation of 8 yards. And that ability to create separation, he was able to get open. Now he just needs to kind of clear the head, relax, and those catches would come. So I'm not really overly worried about him. I believe that is certainly something that's going to kind of come with time. And every year we hear people talk about, every year the Packers seem to struggle to start, and everyone gets worried about it. And there they are at the end of the year as the NFC #1 seed. So nothing to worry about as far as I'm concerned. It's just an opportunity for both Christian Watson and the rest of the Green Bay Packers to grow and get ready for the next week. Second story, and I put this one in here because I got to be one of the biggest Cam Akers truthers from the start. And as someone who saw his value go so high up after his rookie year, and then to only see him get hurt like 4 days after the Scott Fishbowl, and I drafted him, he blows his Achilles, and he's out the entire year. But then he got back for the playoffs, and that gave me hope again. And it was a situation where you think that, yeah, he struggled. His performance wasn't the best, but he looked good enough that they put him on the field. And I was pretty excited about what could possibly happen, even though a lot of other people were very concerned about him. I think in fantasy football, there comes a time where it costs you so much to get somebody on your team that when they do struggle, you can't really trade them, because I can't justify where I selected him and getting what I would get for him right now. It's hard for me. I'd rather continue to hope that he gets back to where he was before than sell him for virtually a late second round that I was offered prior to the season. Now let's get to week one. And I don't get to see week one because wedding festivities have already kicked off. And I just see a box score where he has 3 carries for 0 yards. And I'm just like mortified as a fan and as someone who's got a roster on a few teams. I'm mortified because what that tells me, just looking at the box score, is he's not back from his injury and he may never be back. But then I saw a tweet on Sunday, and that tweet showed him in pass protection early in the second quarter, just completely not want to be involved in it. And the next thing you see is Matt Stafford on the ground. As a former high school head football coach, as former high school offensive coordinator, if you can't pass protect, we can't have you on the field. So that kind of changed my outlook on him in the future, because I feel like that's fixable. So if it wasn't an explosive issue because of the injury and simply a not wanting to mix it up, if he doesn't want to mix it up, we're not going to see him again. If he wants to get back on the field, he'll get back out there, because I'm sure he's heard about it all week long. What do you think about Cam Akers, Coach?
I think it's the Tony Pollard effect, right? Everybody talks about Tony Pollard being more explosive, and I'm one of those guys that, Zeke Elliott's efficiency numbers going down 3 consecutive years. But the big knock on Tony Pollard was he's just not as good in pass pro as Zeke Elliott, and that's a big part of what Dallas is trying to do. And I think Cam Akers, if you watch the clip, we talk inside out, right? Pass protection and not to get too much into the weeds on the coaching part of it, but you're looking at that A gap and out, right? Inside out. Who's the most dangerous man that can make contact with the quarterback on a passing concept that's intermediate to deep, and you're trying to take a shot. And I can't remember who the defender was, but you see him coming in, and you swear you see Cam Akers make eye contact. Then he makes a business decision and decides to kind of flare out to the flat and not take on the blocker, and the Stafford gets sacked. As a coach, that's you want to talk about the fastest way to get to the bench, miss a block and pass protection that causes a sack in a critical game, right? So, he had 3 touches, and if you look at Darrell Henderson, he had 18 touches in the game and seemed to be the dude, and he does a much better job in pass pro. So, it's going to be Henderson, and until Akers can prove that he's going to be the guy, and he's fully back. So, it was very interesting. I think even if you weren't a Cam Akers person, if you want to look at the analytics, or you want to be a guy that says, hey, came back too soon last year for that playoff run, and his usage was really high. He looked the same. It's like a 1.7 yards per carry, I think, in their playoff loss. And you would sit there and look at that and go, hey, we got to get Cam Akers out on the field. But look, if he's not ready, he's not ready. If he's not the same guy that he was, we got to put the best player on the field. And Sean McVay did that. He played Darrell Henderson, and he played well.
Moving on. There are a couple games that we need to talk about before we move on to our next segment, and that's the Lions versus the Eagles. As all year long, everyone talked about how the Eagles are going to, even you, the biggest Cowboy fan came out last week and you predict them to be the NFC East champs. And, for 3.5 quarters, they played really well. But I was a little disappointed with how they played defensively, and I was a little disappointed how they allowed a team to come back when they looked like they had no part of it. And that could be a lot to do with the Lions, too. They're a lot better than what a lot of people think anyways.
I had put one of my bold predictions last week, and we ended up only doing, I think, 3 or 4 each. My 5th one was the Lions to win 8 or 9 games. I think the Lions, what you saw on the show and what you've seen in the offseason, and I was wrong about Dan Campbell going into last year. I didn't think it was a great hire just because of his inexperience. And he's come in and he is slowly changing the culture of that franchise, and guys are completely bought in. And look, up front, that's a top 5 offensive line. What they can do up front. DeAndre Swift was equally outstanding. He ran 26 routes. He had 15 carries for 144 yards, averaged 9.6 yards a carry. He had a touchdown there. They had 3 catches for 31 yards. Amon-Ra St. Brown, people felt like, his increase in production over the last half of the season last year. Now he's got 8 games in a row with, I think, at least 10 targets. He had a 90% snap share, 12 targets, 8 catches, 64 yards, and a touchdown. And then if you want to look at the other side of the ball, you have A.J. Brown, right? If you look at a Mike Vrabel offense in Tennessee, it's predicated upon scheme. We're going to hit the best guy that's available. It's almost like what you see in Dallas. They don't necessarily run play specifically for A.J. Brown outside of some screen stuff. But here in this offense, A.J. Brown's going to get an opportunity to be the guy at all three levels, and he was absolutely outstanding. 11 targets, 10 catches, 155 yards, and played in 88% snap share. And then Jalen Hurts, he could be the QB1. We talked about all offseason. That Konami code is real. You and I always struggle to say that word, but
Right.
17 carries for 90 yards and a touchdown. He had 240 through the air. I mean, he played absolutely lights out. So this Eagles team, which is why I picked them to win the NFC East, I'm really excited about the roster they're building, much as I hate it as a Cowboys fan. Look, defensively, you've got Jordan Davis, who I think was a monster. You know, the one technique. You brought in Jacoby Dean, who slid down the draft, brought over the DB from the Saints. And that's some other moves there. It's going to take a little bit of time, I think, on that side of the ball for that unit to gel. But I love what the Eagles are doing, how they're building that roster. I love what the Lions are doing. But probably another year or two away, a couple more drafts. I think the Lions be contenders in the NFC North.
One thing about the Eagles I wanted to bring up, and that was, are you worried about Devonte Smith? I mean, for him to come out of the game with virtually no stats whatsoever, he showed very well last year, and I think a lot of people expected more. Does that leave you concerned at all for his future? Or is A.J. Brown just going to take all the targets every week?
The Slim Reaper, right? Isn't that what we call him? Devonte Smith. A lot of concerns about his BMI, but no, I think Devonte Smith is going to be fine. I think game script, you saw him use Goddard, I think a little bit more. There were a lot of people that felt like Goddard wasn't going to be as big a part of the offense this year. And if you take week one as any indication, he's certainly going to be pivotal in this offense. Look, I love what they did offensively, Nick Sirianni and that group and what they're doing. I think they're using A.J. Brown the right way. I think this is what A.J. Brown deserved in Tennessee. So it's going to be tough. I mean, Devonte Smith's going to have to understand, hey, I'm the second fiddle, maybe third if you want to talk about him being behind Goddard, but in a run-heavy, typically type of offense. But they threw the ball 32 times. There'll be opportunities for Devonte Smith. I'm not ready after 1 week to hit the panic button. But there are some concerns, yeah. I think you'd be a fool not to at least consider that.
Let's move on to one more game that we'll talk about from week one, and that was the matchup last Thursday with the Bills and the Rams. And I think it's official. It shouldn't even take his performance last week for this to be said, but Josh Allen is just so damn good. That guy came out. I mean, he is just so fun to watch. Everyone concerned about him coming out of Wyoming and his accuracy issues, but the dude is a winner. And, I mean, I don't know. I mean, he's just a fun guy to watch play football.
So he's 6'5", 240, runs like a high school tailback. I mean, the stiff arm he put on the DB was absolutely lights out. I think I tweeted that Kyle Brandt from Good Morning Football has got to give him an angry run on the show. But he's as advertised. He's everything we thought he was going to be. Coming out of Wyoming, there were concerns about his accuracy. I think he's proven the doubters wrong there. 26 of 31 for 297 yards, 3 touchdowns. Yeah, he threw 2 picks. One of those was on a slant route to Isaiah McKenzie early in the game, and Isaiah McKenzie completely wobbled it, pops off his chest, and goes right into the linebacker's hand, right into the defender's arm. So it was one of those fluke interceptions. But yeah, Josh Allen, Stephon Diggs is going to be the alpha in that offense. Gabe Davis, Gabe Davis truthers. He got his touchdown, but he only had 4 catches.
You know what though? As a guy who no longer has any rosters with Gabe Davis on it, because people were willing to pay a heck of a lot for him. If I had him still, I would be very happy with that.
Yeah.
If I'm getting 88 yards, I'd like a couple more catches in PPR leagues. But if I'm getting 88 yards and I'm getting a touchdown every week, I mean, it's probably not going to happen every week, but that's not bad. I would be pleasantly happy if I had him. So let's move on.
I think the 2 takeaways in that game too, they're interesting of note is everybody talked about James Cook and what he was going to do, in the passing as the pass catcher in that backfield. It's not something Singletary and Moss necessarily do particularly well, at least not at the level that James Cook did coming out of Georgia. And Singletary and Moss dominated. I thought Moss looked great. I thought Singletary looked good, and James Cook, of course, on his first touch, fumbles the rock, and that's not going to get you a lot of carries moving forward. So I think Buffalo is content with. We've got a really good opportunity to be really special this year. We're going to go through Singletary and Moss and allow James Cook to earn touches. And then the other part of it was Allen Robinson, 1 catch for 12 yards, only targeted twice. that was more game script. If you watch, I went back and watched them all 22 on that game, and Allen Robinson was open quite a bit. The problem was Stafford just didn't have the time to get to a second and third progression. So on the deep dig routes, on the deep in breaking routes, there's a deep comeback. He created some separation, and he just never got an opportunity. So I think Allen Robinson's going to be fine. So I think people just need to, again, don't hit the panic button. Allen Robinson's a talented guy. I'm looking forward to see what happens over the next few weeks.
And they paid him too much money for them not to get him more involved. I mean,
sure.
How many times did we have on last year's coach approach, did we have analysts come on and say, if you want something to utilize as far as projecting the future, follow the money. They're going to find a way to get that guy involved. Last note we'll talk about for last week, and that is someone I don't have on any rosters, and not because I'm not a fan, but just because you better have a very high pick if you're going to get Jonathan Taylor. And, everyone, you got Nyheim Hines getting a new contract. Everyone was worried about, his usage in the pass game and what that meant and da-da-da-da-da. And week one, here we go. We get 38 opportunities for Jonathan Taylor. 31 carries, 4 receptions on 7 targets. I mean, if you want to talk about a workout horseback, that's Jonathan Taylor, and he certainly delivered.
So special. I think people that were concerns about the volume play. Like, look, if you look at what he did in high school, college in Wisconsin, and now in the NFL, his body, his archetype as a running back, he's thick in the lower body, he's thick in the gluteus maximus, if you want to call it. And that's always the things I looked at as a coach for running backs is, hey, is he thick? What's his lower body strength look like? And John Taylor's every bit of that. So, and then what was really, really interesting to see too is he had more usage in the passing game as well. So I think you could be looking at a season where Jonathan Taylor ends up with 50, 60 catches this year, in addition to, 1,500 plus rushing yards. And of course, he gets every opportunity inside the 5-yard line, which is critical for running backs when it comes to scoring points in fantasy. So I'm excited. I mean, it's going to take a lot to knock him off that number one perch.
Right. He's not going anywhere. Now the unfortunate part of football, and that's injuries. And nobody was hurt more than the Dallas Cowboys with the Dak Prescott injury. But before we get into him, I'd like to just talk about the Dallas Cowboys. And coming from a guy who actually picked them to win the NFC East last week, I got to tell you, man, if I'm a fan, I am so concerned about their future. And especially this year, not just because of the Prescott injury. I just don't like the roster. If you look at the guys they have in the field, I mean, for them to have that wide receiver room and try and compete, I just don't know if it's possible. And I think the blame has got to lie on the front office. The Jones family, since, how many times did we hear about how great of a quarterback Tony Romo was? Unfortunately, can't win the big game. How many times have we heard the same thing about Dak Prescott? Well, the common denominator in both those situations was Jerry Jones. And in this roster this year, it looks like having to pay Dak Prescott really killed him. They had to walk away, virtually get nothing from Amari Cooper. They let other guys walk on the offensive line. They hoped that a first-round pick at tackle would be the answer. And now you just add Dak Prescott's injury, and it doesn't look good for the Cowboys.
I mean, where do I start? I mean, you hit on a lot of it. I mean, there's so many issues. Just you see teams, and I think the biggest thing with the Cowboys is look at it and go, what did the Cowboys do this offseason to take the next step? Around Dak Prescott and the defense with as much talent as you can to be able to play really good, grind it out, NFL playoff caliber football when it matters most. And they just didn't do anything to help Dak out. They let La'el Collins, who would have been a great – yeah, I mean, it just –
Their biggest acquisition was on the offensive side was a third-round receiver who they didn't even have active last week.
Didn't step on the field, didn't get a target, didn't see a touch, didn't do anything. And you got Michael Gallup trying to come back. You let Amari Cooper go for a bag of peanuts. You let La'el Collins go over to Cincinnati. You have, there's so many issues with that offensive line. You draft Tyler Smith as your left tackle of the future. You've been playing him at left guard all year because you have Tyron Smith. Now Tyron Smith's out until December. Now you have to move him to left tackle where he's played in college, but hasn't really seen a whole lot of reps at the NFL level because that was supposed to be something that was a year or two away. And then Connor Williams goes down with a high ankle sprain, and now you're just trying to figure out, patchwork this offensive line. And now you're going into week 2 against the Cincinnati Bengals, and it's Cooper Rush is not going to. If we can get him to win one game out of the next 4, if Dak does come back, which I still think he comes back probably after the bye week. I think if we're being smart, he's coming back in week 1 after the bye week. If you rush him back in week 4, 5, 6, then that thumb's not completely healed. I don't know that that's going to be a smart move for the Cowboys. But at the same time, it's going to come down to Cooper Rush winning a game or 2 while he's in there, so that they're still in this playoff hunt.
Yeah, it's going to be rough. And one thing, I was actually listening to NFL radio driving home from work, and they were talking about the offensive line problems with Dallas. And Pat Kerwin, who, you read a book from him. I think it's called. Yeah, he's the best. I love his show with Jim Miller. But what he talked about is they brought in Jason Peters real late after the injury to your left tackle, and he's not ready to play. He's 40 years old, not ready to play. But Pat's thought was activate him and use him on third down, obvious passing situations, so he's not getting beat up on first and second down. But you have a little more security for Cooper back there if you take the rookie out and put Peters in. But I just thought that was pretty interesting. But let's move on to the next injury, and that's one that really hurt the San Francisco 49ers and really hurt a lot of people who invested a lot in Elijah Mitchell. I was high on Elijah Mitchell last year, mostly because I'm high on guys that I get late in drafts who succeed. And he's someone who made a heck of a lot of people real happy. He started out really well, but dang it, if he didn't injure his knee and he's out till at least week 10, and that brings you to a whole different carousel of different backs that are being given an opportunity. So that's an injury that right off the bat really hurts the 49ers.
Yeah, it's tough. When Elijah Mitchell, people talk about Shanahan being a running back by committee guy, and when they talk about Elijah Mitchell, look at the games when he's healthy, that's not been the case at all. He's been an RB1. He's been the guy. He started out the game with 6 carries, 41 yards prior to the injury. He's averaging, 7 yards a carry. The reality is now you've got Jeff Wilson, and I know a lot of people spend a lot of money on a lot of their fab on Jeff Wilson. Now that depends on roster size, what you currently have on your roster. If you went 0 running back, and now I shouldn't be 0 running back, but somewhere in that range. But hero running back, you don't have a whole lot of running backs, a lot of depth. Yeah, I can see it, but I wasn't willing to spend more than 10% of my fab to get him because I just don't see that he's going to be the Elijah Mitchell type back. If you look at after Elijah Mitchell went out, Deebo Samuel got 6 carries. Trey Lance had 10 carries. So you got 16 carries from those 2 guys that are not a running back, right? Yeah. You could argue Deebo Samuel is, but by position, he's a receiver. But, look at what he did last year. But now you have Jordan Mason. I know you're high on. I think there's a good opportunity for him to get some touches. You've got TDP and Tyrion Davis-Price that just signed Marlon Mack to the practice squad. I think that's simply a depth piece. If one of those 3 go down, Marlon Mack's familiar with the system and has got some, a week or 2 with the practice squad, and he could be a guy if you need him to be. But it's frustrating. I think that and what showed in that game too is what we talked about before the season started when I did my breakdown of the Niners. That interior of their offensive line, their center and their 2 guards, man, it's not good. It's not good. And now you've got a running back down it's by far your best running back in that running back room. So there are some concerns for San Francisco.
It's hard for me to really look at that game and judge the 49ers off of it. That weather, the entire game was just god-awful. And, I wouldn't be surprised. I didn't see the play, but I wouldn't be surprised that slippery field might have had something to do with Elijah going down. But I'm really – and we're going to talk about this week's game with San Francisco later on. But I'm really looking forward to seeing seeing if we see anything better than what we saw last week. Moving on, we got a couple receivers that are likely. In fact, we know for sure one of them is out. I think both of them will definitely be out, and that's Chris Godwin and Keenan Allen, who are both nursing a hamstring injury. Keenan's definitely out for tomorrow's game, which we'll talk more about later. But Chris Godwin being out, he looked explosive. A lot of people were concerned about him. Heck, just 2 weeks ago, Twitter talked about it all day long. They removed his brace. He's going to be great. And then he gets hurt week 1. And you don't know if that's any relation to the ACL and coming back a little bit early, but he looks to be out 2 to 3 weeks.
That Hey, look, this is an opportunity, for the Chargers. Josh Palmer's got to step up. DeAndre Carter had a pretty good week last week, and then you got Gerald Everett. I think becomes a big part of what they're doing, the intermediate part of the field, middle of the field. There's some opportunities, and luckily for them, they've got some depth at the wide receiver position. They've got a more than capable tight end. So I think the Chargers, if there's a team out there that can take a wide receiver one that goes down and still be competitive and have players around that can rally it, next man up mentality, I think the Chargers certainly fit that bill.
Let's move on. We got two more injuries we'll talk about real quick because they popped up, and that's Alvin Kamara with a rib injury, but he faces Tampa Bay. Dennis Allen just yesterday said he sees no reason why Alvin won't play. So if you roster him, I wouldn't be overly concerned. And then you got T. Higgins. T. Higgins suffered a concussion early in the loss to the Pittsburgh Steelers. He's still in protocol. So, but if he's good and come back, then, I'm playing him without any reservations. If he's not, you obviously have to take a turn and look for somebody else.
Hey, if there's a game for T. Higgins to miss, it's the one against the Cowboys, right?
There you go.
I feel pretty confident Cincinnati comes out with a win there. So, I think it's an opportunity for Tyler Boyd. I think he becomes a guy, especially in DFS, that I would certainly look at if Higgins is going to be out. As far as Kamara goes, they just signed Latavius Murray. I just saw that before we jumped on the practice squad, or I shouldn't say practice squad, they signed Latavius Murray. And then you get Mark Ingram, who, God, the guy just, he plays well when he gets an opportunity, So
I don't know if you saw any of the after their kind of how they reacted in the locker room after the game, after their big win, their big comeback against the Falcons. Man, I'll tell you what, is there a more fun guy to have on the team than Mark Ingram? That guy is just one of the best teammates. The way he used to always, go to the media and talk highly of Lamar Jackson, and now all he does is talk highly about. He just seems like a great guy, and that's probably a big reason why. Not that he's not a player still, but usually backs don't have the longevity that he is having. And I just think that, his attitude, his demeanor is a big reason why he's still in the NFL.
Oh, for sure.
All right, moving on. Week 2 previews and match, and we're going to start right off the bat. That's the big heavyweight title match we have with this. I was going to call them the San Diego Chargers. I can't get used to it, but the LA Chargers traveling to Kansas City tomorrow. We've already each week we're going to talk about start and sits for the Thursday game. And, for me, start sit for the Chargers, we've already talked about Josh Palmer. If I'm in a super flex and I got to start 3 receivers and I got a couple flex positions that I need to have a player in, I have no problem playing Josh Palmer there. And then at tight end, I think you got to be real happy if you've got Gerald Everett at tight end. Last week he had 54 yards receiving and he got himself in the end zone. And, that's a guy that, especially in the tight end, with the guys you get a pick from the tight end, if you don't have one of the top 5, man, you're streaming and you're just hoping that you're hitting the lottery ticket each week.
Yeah, that's a great play there with the Chargers. And I also think on the other side of the ball, Travis Kelce looked like he tight end one last week. What they're doing there, I think Sky Moore's going to have a better opportunity as the season goes on. He didn't have a great week last week. We'll get into rookies here a little bit, but and in CEH, Clyde Edwards-Helaire is a guy that played really well last week. They used him on that shuffle pass close to the end zone. He scored a couple times for the Chiefs last week, and I think that back Ronald Jones. I think a lot of guys thought that Ronald Jones might play a role there. I never saw it. He didn't fit Tampa Bay, and I think he's got talent, but there's something from a mental aspect that he's just not being on the practice field that's getting him to earn the opportunities when it comes to playing and suiting up on Sunday. So.
If you have Ronald Jones, I'm sorry, but I think that ship has sailed. And I say that because when it was garbage time, all we saw was Isaiah Pacheco, 12 carries, 62 yards, a touchdown. So I think, and I'm excited if I have Isaiah Pacheco. I don't care that it came at garbage time. Much people always talk about how, he only performs when it doesn't matter. Well, you know what fantasy football matters? When he's performing. So, I'd be excited if I had him just because it was an opportunity. And, that running back position is already fickle enough with injuries. To think that CEH is going to give you 17 games is not realistic. So at some point, you're going to be able to play Pacheco as a starting running back for you. And while we're talking about rookies, I skipped over it. Why don't we jump back and get into the rookies? Because while there were, it wasn't the class of 2020, this rookie receiver class right off the bat is looking pretty good.
Yeah, and we can start with Drake London. He's the first receiver off the board. He landed a great landing spot in Atlanta. I think there was concerns about Marcus Mariota and his ability to deliver the football, but I thought he looked good in his first game. They used him in the rushing game. But Drake London, 72% snap share. He ran 30 routes, 7 targets, 5 grabs for 74 yards. He was very relevant. I think we're going to continue to see that on a weekly basis. Great opportunity to finish as a wide receiver one, and that in terms of rookies, chance to lead this rookie class. I think what's going to hurt him is going to be the touchdown upside, in Atlanta, but their inability to score.
I hear what you're saying with that, but I'll tell you what, if you watched his play, a big part of him, everyone talked about he can't separate. And that's exactly what he did in this game. I mean, he's making a lot of plays on crossing routes, and they didn't really utilize him where a lot of people thought he was going to be utilized the most, and that's by stretching the field. And you talk about game script, and it just didn't materialize, but I don't see any reason why you're not going to see that at some point with Drake London.
No, hey, I agree. And then I think the next guy on our list was Jahan Dotson. 88% snap share. He ran 40 routes. He only had 5 targets, but he turned that into 3 catches for 40 yards. And hey, if you're only gonna get 3 catches and you score on 2 of them, I think you're doing some things all right. So I think it worked out well for Dotson. Hey, Carson Wentz. I mean, that's the guy we talked about coming in this year that. Like, oh, here we go again. Carson Wentz, right. 13 years. 27 touchdowns, only 7 interceptions last year. But he loses the Jaguars. They don't make the playoffs, so we got to ship him out. And, first week, he throws 4 touchdowns in Washington. They pull one out. But
he had a lot of Carson Wentz moments, though. I mean, let's not.
I know.
I mean, he did, but I'll give him a little bit of credit. But how about Garrett Wilson? And talk about a guy who got poor quarterback play. I really – as someone who has a lot of Garrett Wilson on his rosters, I wasn't concerned so much with Joe Flacco starting the season off with him, because a lot of the reports during training camp is that Joe Flacco was the best quarterback in training camp compared to him and Zach Wilson. But it didn't look pretty for the Jets offense. And that's one of the reasons why we're not talking much about Breece Hall. Not that I don't love his talent, but the Jets just came out and struggled. Yet Garrett Wilson still put together, 5 catches, 64 yards. I was pretty happy as a Garrett Wilson roster manager.
No, I thought Garrett Wilson, he out-targeted Elijah Moore by 1, I think it was, in terms of the target department. He had a 49% snap share, a little bit light. What we want to see, especially in an offense where Joe Flacco, I think, was how many times did he throw the ball last week? 50, 60 times last week, it seemed like. But there's going to be opportunities just because of negative game script. The Jets are going to find themselves down. You lose the offensive line, the left tackle again for the year. And even though I think they're building that roster the right way, I think Robert Saleh's got a lot of work to do there. But they're going to have to throw the football. And one thing Joe Flacco can do when he needs to is he can still make all the NFL throws. It's just sometimes the decision-making that gets him in trouble. But I think Garrett Wilson, Elijah Moore, and I think those guys are going to be fine in terms of what that offense is going to look like, because we're going to have to throw the football.
Everybody's, punching boy for Twitter during the preseason was Trailon Burks. And yet here we go. When the games count, much like Jamar Chase last year, Trailon Burks came out and he showed right away that he's got the ability to make plays at the NFL level.
Yeah, I compare the Trailon Burks situation with his conditioning. Remember when OTA started, people questioned, his conditioning. And to me, it reminds me of Jamar Chase. And I'm certainly not putting Trailon Burks in Jamar Chase's category, but everybody talked about Jamar Chase last preseason about how he was having trouble adjusting to the NFL football. And there were jokes about, did he practice all offseason with a college ball or did he use an NFL ball? And you look at what he did his rookie year. I think Trailon Burks is going to be just fine. Unfortunately, in the offense that they run in Tennessee with Mike Vrabel, it's so heavily dominated by the run game. But from a passing perspective, Mike Vrabel has never been a guy that schemes guys open. A.J. Brown never had more than 106 targets in Tennessee. And you look at what he did with Philly last week, and that's a guy that should be getting 12, 13, 14, 15 targets in a game. Game script allows it. It's just not what Mike Vrabel does. But if you look at Trailon Burks and Kyle Phillips was the guy that really stood out. He played more snaps. He ran more routes. He had more targets than Trailon Burks. But Trailon Burks at the end of the season, I think, is going to be, a good addition to that offense. I still believe in Trailon Burks, and I think some people's expectations are a little bit too high. I think you got to allow him to have his rookie season. But I love what Kyle Phillips is doing and what he can do out of the slot. So I'm excited to see what these guys can do. I just wish these are two receivers I wish you could see in a Sean McVay style offense versus what we're doing in Tennessee, because I think the talent is really there to do a lot of things, and with the creativity, especially if you get him in an outside zone scheme versus a power scheme that doesn't allow itself to as much RPO play or play action. But unfortunately, they're in the offense they're in. But I still believe in Trailon Burks. I certainly believe in Kyle Phillips.
One more receiver I want to talk about, and he had a big 2-point conversion. And man, that New Orleans Saints offense, they've got some weapons out there with Landry, and then you got to be happy about what you saw from Michael Thomas, and then Chris Olave. I'll tell you, I was really impressed with his play. Just another one of these rookie receivers that doesn't look like they're going to need much time to adjust from college football to the NFL.
Yeah, he only had 3 targets. We had 3 catches for 41 yards, and he had a big – I think it was a big – he's the one that got the 2-point conversion, I think.
He did, yep.
In the game. And, 72% snap share, ran 32 routes. So I think Chris Olave – it's interesting how far Saints have gone between the wide receiver room they had last year and the wide receiver room they have this year. Bringing in Jarvis Landry, you get Michael Thomas back. You had Chris Olave out of Ohio State. Then you got Taysom Hill doing his thing at the tight end position at the H-back, and still involved in some what they do in the run game with him as well. But I think the Saints, look, they're built very, very well on the defensive side of the ball. I think there's a lot of opportunity for Chris Olave to be a big part of this offense. Landry's only got maybe a couple good years left, if that. So Olave's going to have a good future with the Saints. I have no doubt.
Yep, and there's not too many things more fun than rookies, and so especially when you're in fantasy football, and to see guys come out and play the way they did last week is always fun. We've already hit upon the big game tomorrow night. Neither one of us made our picks, so we'll go ahead and do that real quick before we move on to 4 other matchups for week 2. Kansas City at Chargers. I know you are you're of the opinion that the Chargers are going to be there on top at the end of all this. But I got to go with Kansas City at home tomorrow night.
I think Kansas City wins at home tomorrow. I think the long game, I think the Chargers, I just think from a roster, especially with the defensive side of the ball, I think the Chargers have a better defense, and I think they have all the ability with Justin Herbert to match up offensively. I do think the Chiefs have been as good as they looked in week 1, and the offense changed a little bit without the deep shots they used with Tyreek Hill, and I think you're seeing what they're doing with Sky Moore and Cole Hardman and Juju Smith-Schuster and MVS and what they did with CEH. You're just seeing a more efficient Patrick Mahomes, where he's higher percentage throws, allow guys to catch the ball in space and make plays. He was lights out. So I'm excited about what Kansas City's doing. I think they start the season 2-0. I think in this matchup, you go with the home team. I think that's the separator for me. And Keenan Allen being out, certainly doesn't help. But I would take Kansas City in this game as well.
There you go. You mentioned one thing I think we're not really hitting upon, and that is what Mac did week 1 for the Chargers. You get Bosa and Mac on that defensive side, and I'll tell you what, man, that is going to be a fun team to watch down the road. They got to be really –
they had Derwin James.
Yeah, well, he's on the best safety in football. Yeah. Let's move on to another one, and especially after the weeks they had last week. I'm really excited about the Minnesota and Philadelphia matchup this weekend.
Yeah, I can't wait to see this one. I think Minnesota, we talked about them earlier. Justin Jefferson, I think, is everything that we thought he'd be in a Kevin O'Connell offense. I think Adam Thielen will see the target share. Only 3 last week. I think you see that move up this week. What was interesting in the Minnesota game plan last week was how often they used Johnny Munt as opposed to Irv Smith Jr., just because of game script. He's a better inline blocker. He ran about the same number of routes as Irv Smith, and he was on the field twice as much, simply because he was used as an inline blocker in the run game and in the play action game. But I think what Minnesota's building is going to be good. But I also think that Philadelphia, I was so close in our prediction show last week of picking Philly to represent the NFC in the Super Bowl. I couldn't pass up on the Rams and that roster from top to bottom. But, man, you look at what they did in week 1 with Jalen Hurts and with A.J. Brown, and Miles Sanders looked great. They've got the 3-headed monster in the backfield with Boston Scott and Kenny Gainwell. So I think this is going to be a great game. Again, it's in Philadelphia. I think the Eagles are playing really, really well. I think Jordan Davis and Kobe Dean get another week. I take Philadelphia to win this one at home.
Yeah, it's hard not to pick against a home team, especially one that's supposed to be predicted to do as well as it does all year long.
Yeah.
But I'm going to go with Minnesota. So I don't know if it's just because I want to not pick the same one, but I do believe in what they're doing. I believe that the thing that gives me a little concern is when you talk to Jared Goff after the game, and Jared Goff was asked about, golly, look what you guys did offensively. It was this, it was that. And his first remark was, we left a bunch of points out of there. We should have put 50 up against those guys. And then they went straight over to Philadelphia and talked to their defensive players and said, hey, Jared Goff, and they basically said, he's right. We're struggling. We need to get better. So I think Minnesota, I wouldn't be surprised to see another Justin Jefferson 150-yard plus type of game.
Hey, you certainly could. That's the thing about what Kevin O'Connell does, the scheme Cooper Kupp last year and the scheme Justin Jefferson this year. You can't take your top corner and travel. You can't. There's things you just can't do defensively. You're going to have to pick your poison. You're going to line him up and put him in situations to get, like I touched on earlier, free releases and the scheme. He can beat you at all three levels. It's Cooper Kupp and verticality. Not that Cooper Kupp can't beat teams vertically, but what he can do is a little bit different. I give Cooper Kupp the edge and yards after catch, but what Justin Jefferson can do, vertically is a little bit different. So, what a fun game, man.
Yeah,
I like it.
Yeah. Let's move on to another game of 2 1-0 teams, and that's the Dolphins and the Ravens. And everybody was talking about the Dolphins have a lot of press this offseason with the acquisition of Tyreek Hill. Was Tua going to be the guy? How is that offense going to look? In the first week, we see Tyreek go off. He didn't get in the end zone. We see the offense still could support Jalen Waddle. And by the way, does he not have the best celebration of a touchdown? That Waddle is pretty comical. And they're facing off against Lamar Jackson and the Ravens. Now, they didn't have a very difficult game last week playing the Jets, but this is the matchup that I'm really excited to see.
Yeah, I'm excited as well. I think Minnesota, I'm not Minnesota, Miami. That's an offense I was really looking forward to seeing as well. With Tua not having the arm strength that a Patrick Mahomes doesn't have the ability to no-look passes, doesn't have the ability to throw guys open necessarily as well as a Patrick Mahomes. I don't think it's fair to compare the two, but he can be an accurate quarterback. He's making the right decision, and he's putting people in good places in good situations, doesn't turn the ball over. Miami's a team that can certainly compete and cause some problems. But I think, and I was a little bit surprised at the Ravens. We didn't see Lamar Jackson run as much. And there was a podcast I listened to today, and people making the comment like, hey, do you think it's because of the contract situation, him betting on himself and saying, hey, we're going to table the conversation now the season has started. I can't play my own agent and be a leader of this football team and dedicate my time to game plans and do both. So I'm going to go ahead and table that until the next year. Is he intentionally not running as often? And I don't buy into that. I think Roman's going to call the play that puts him in the best situation. I think he's going to read, on zone reads. He's going to read the read P, and he's going to hand it off when he should. He's going to take it and pull it when he should. I don't think it was necessarily that he's not wanting to run as much. I think it just didn't lead itself last week to do that. But I think that's a fun matchup, and I hope Baltimore opens it up a little bit more offensively this week than they did last week.
As someone who has a lot of Rashad Bateman and put him in, and so I was a little bit. Well, obviously that big long touchdown you'd love to see, but I kind of expected him to be more involved in intermediate, getting first down type. I think he started his season last year with like 8 straight receptions that led to a first down. So I kind of would like to see volume a little bit more with him. One other guy on the other side of the field that I was very disappointed in, and that was Mike Gesicki. All offseason, a lot of people. First, there was are they going to give him a new contract? Then they just signed him to the franchise tag. But he comes out and he does virtually nothing. And a lot of people were worried about can Tua, keep as many weapons as they have involved. And it was apparent that if anyone's not going to be involved, it's going to be Mike Gesicki.
It's going to run through Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. And look, rightfully so. I think that's the closest thing you can get to if you want. Allen Robinson can put up the numbers we think he can, but and Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson. There's a lot of wide receiver duos in the sleeve with T. Higgins and Jamar Chase, and you can go on and on and on. But I think they expect these two to be right there in terms of the top wide receiver duos in the NFL. And it should. This offense should go through Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. So I think Mike Gesicki, unfortunately, is going to be the odd man out. And look, we haven't even talked about Cedric Wilson. They didn't do a whole lot last week either, but he's in the mix as a wide receiver. He played well in Dallas last year when given the opportunity when Gallup went down, and it's going to be a long season, I think, for Mike Gesicki. Truther.
Yeah. So who's your pick? I'll go first. I'm gonna go away from the home team, and I'm gonna go with the Dolphins. I kind of believe in what they're doing.
I love what they're doing. I just think I'm going to go back to what I said in our prediction show last week. I think Lamar Jackson turns it up a notch. I think that Baltimore is going to get it going. I can't bet against Lamar Jackson. Not in this matchup.
All right, let's move on. Let's go to a big NFC South matchup, and that's with the Buccaneers at the Saints. These are our two winners of the NFC South, with you picking the Buccaneers, me picking the Saints. While the Saints struggled against a team that a lot of people thought was going to be one of the bottom-tier teams in the Atlanta Falcons, they did rally. They came back from, I want to say, 16 points. You got to love the way they're all rallying against Jameis Winston. I love the defensive side of the ball for those guys, and, I think it's going to be a heck of a game.
Yeah, I like what the Saints are doing. Again, you talk about Jameis Winston coming back from the injury, and you talk about the team where they have, and they can do it decent. Adam Trautman's nothing but an inline blocker. I mean, anybody who's an Adam Trautman owner needs to move on. I mean, he's just not a dude. We've seen enough. But I think Tampa Bay with Tom Brady, I don't think he was, even though they dominated Dallas, I don't think he was really excited or happy about the way the team played overall. And I think we see him take another step this week and see him air it out even a little bit more. But Leonard Fournette looked fantastic last week. I think they're going to continue to run through him. I think Rashad White, I think by week 5 or 6, really implants himself in this offense and can spell Leonard Fournette a little bit. But I can't bet against Tom Brady, in this game. I go to Tampa Bay for sure.
All right, well, I'm going with Saints. Let's move on to our last pick of the week, and that's involving two teams, one team that struggled and another team that a lot of people thought that they may not win a game, and that's the Seahawks at the 49ers.
Yes, this is an interesting one. Never in a million years will I pick the Seahawks to win that game. I get it, the 12th man, it's in Seattle, but Geno Smith, right, versus Russell Wilson with Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, Alberto, and the weapons they have with Javonte Williams, who look great, 12 targets, 11 receptions. Loved what they were doing in terms of that backfield. It's a tough one. I just think that the Seahawks stole one last week. I think they're going to run up against it again against San Francisco, coming off that game in Chicago that just was not a great start to the season. Trey Lance, again, throw it out. The conditions, everything else, it doesn't lend itself to what Trey Lance does well. If you really want to think about from just a football scheme, probably a game that we would have said, hey, it's probably a better fit for Jimmy Garoppolo than a Trey Lance. But unfortunately, it is what it is. But I think this week San Francisco puts it together. I don't expect this game to be close. I think San Francisco wins by 10 or more and takes Seattle to the shed.
I'm in agreement with your pick. One thing I will say about the Seahawks before we move on, and that is that I think we learned a lot about what Pete Carroll really wanted and why he went with Geno Smith. Because Geno Smith, while his numbers may not have impressed you, the guy managed the game. He kept them involved. Or I should say kept them, he didn't make mistakes. He allowed the defense to make plays, and it was pretty Pete Carroll-ish type of football. And it kind of showed you why you don't see a lock in there. And I think it made it a little easier for him to walk away from a Russell Wilson because he no longer had to hear any more about let Russell cook. The reality is that I don't think Pete Carroll wants anybody to cook. I think he wants to shorten the game, play good defense, and get out of there with a 17-13 type of win.
I was just going to say, to your point, that's such a great point. When you looked at the offense, I kept waiting for them to take DK Metcalf and run him on that post, run him on some go routes, and they didn't. It was more curls, it was hitches, it was slant routes, it was intermediate, short to intermediate, and trying to just say, hey, we're going to use his big body. Randy had a great matchup with the corner last week, but I just felt like that's what Pete Carroll was doing. It's like, hey, I'm going to put Geno Smith in a situation to managed. It's like it takes me back, and I think of like Trent Dilfer when I went on that run with the Ravens, right? All they had to do is don't turn the ball over, let your defense make plays, let them create turnovers, let them flip field position, be smart. We don't need to score 30, 40 a game. We just need to be smart, take care of the football, let DK Metcalf, let Lockett, let this running back Rashad Penny, and let them do their thing. And look, they used Disley. Disley had a great week. We didn't talk about him with tight ends. He was used heavily. They had 3 different tight ends in Seattle that were getting some run last week. So I do like the game plan they came in with, and I think it was I said it. I don't know if it was on our podcast last week or another one that I was a guest on, but I made the comment like Geno Smith, to me, he was the obvious choice. When I did my projection for Project 32, I never even considered Drew Lock as a starting quarterback. I had Geno Smith playing the full year, and it makes sense to me. But I felt like Pete Carroll is going to – he doesn't want to rebuild. He's too old to rebuild. But at the same time, you look at the talent, and you just go, yeah, but I don't. Then Jamal Adams goes out, so we'll see what goes on there. But I just felt like they're going to play for a new franchise quarterback next year. And then they come out and they pull off the upset in week 1. And,
right.
Here we
that's
go.
The goal. That's why a lot of people, and that's why even a lot of people thought they're not going after Jimmy G because they're perfectly fine playing the year out, going 5-12, and then the next thing you see is they're putting themselves in position to get a quarterback in the draft. But the reality of it is that he wants to win, but he wants to do it his way. And, Geno Smith, he believes that that's the best opportunity for him to win. All right, we got a question here, Bruce. What do you think about this? Is Jalen Reagor worth a dynasty stash? I would say, I know I'm in a lot of leagues, I call them my sleeper leagues, and I've got 34 guys on a roster, and then you got a taxi squad. If you've got a roster where you got guys that, I know that on one of my teams I have Guyton, the receiver for the Chargers. Don't remember his first name. If I've got Guyton on my team, yeah, I'll go ahead and grab Reagor. I don't know what he's going to mean for Minnesota. You would have more access to it than I would. Did he see any playing time last week? What are your thoughts on Reagor?
I'm not. I've never been a Jalen Reagor guy. I mean, I think you go back to the draft, and they had opportunities to get, much better players at that position, and they were looking for wide receivers. And the Eagles just seem to always get it wrong when it comes to wide receivers, so why not just trade for one? We'll go ahead and get A.J. Brown. And now they did draft Devonte Smith last year, which is a pick that I think is going to pan out. We touched on him earlier. I'm not a Jalen Reagor guy at all. I didn't like his college tape. I don't think he certainly hasn't transitioned to the NFL very well. I don't think he can play in quarterback play. He's had plenty of opportunities. To me, it's on your roster size. You would have to have an injury to like a KJ Osborne, where you can get an opportunity to be that wide receiver 3 in that offense, or Adam Thielen in Minnesota. I personally don't think he's worth a stash, but depending on how deep your rosters are, you got to make that call. But, in Dynasty, I don't see the talent. I never have. So I don't have a single share, and I've got 37 teams. I don't have a single share of Jalen Reagor, so that probably answers your question. But appreciate you coming on. I wish I could pronounce your name. I'd give you a shout out. Ghassan Ayad, I think is how it's said. That's my shot, but I appreciate the question.
Yeah, that was awesome. Thank you so much. With that, why don't we talk about what we're going to try and do on Sunday? Sunday mornings, we're going to come on and we're going to take questions much like Ghassan just sent us, and we're going to talk about the inactives that are just going to be announced and just kind of some late start sit questions maybe, and kind of talk about what we want to see during the day. And I don't know about you, but I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, I can't wait. I mean, I think it's going to be it's going to be a fun show on Sunday. It's the first time we're doing it. I think there's a lot of shows that talk about start and sit, and who's your lineup, who's injured, who's going to be active, who's not. So as that news comes across, it becomes breaking news. And we're going to try to relay that to you. You guys are last minute trying to set your fantasy lineups. So that's it's going to be a fun show. I mean, I can't wait to dive in. We'll talk a little bit more about the actual matchups, who we like in certain games. And then, of course, we would love to have you guys jump on and ask start and sit questions. We'll certainly answer those. I think a lot of times start and sit questions can become a coin toss, right? And sometimes depending on the roster size and the matchups that week, we'll certainly try to steer you in the right direction. We feel confident we can do that.
Him telling us we got a little more info here. He's tanking. So To answer your question now that I know that you're tanking, if you're tanking, I would have no reason to pick up Jalen Reagor. And the reason why I say that is I have a few teams that I'm not actively competing in. I hate to say that I'm tanking, but if I'm tanking, I want to pick up a guy that may blossom down the road and actually be something. I'm not worried about picking up a guy right now that could help me for the near future. I'm more worried about the future of the next couple seasons. So that's why you're going to see guys like a Jordan Mason on my roster, guys that may blow up. And now you're taking someone who has very little value, and then you're able to turn them into a second-round pick down the road. So if you're tanking, I definitely don't think you should pick them up.
Yeah, if you're tanking, you're certainly looking for upside guys that maybe aren't rostered up on waivers. You see something maybe a year or two out. You're also stockpile draft pick. So you're looking to make trades for guys that might be hitting an age apex, and it might be time to trade those guys away to teams that are in contention that might be willing to give up future draft picks to win the league this year, and that sets you up for hopefully 2, 3, 4 wins. Winning your league 2 or 3 times because you're building a roster for the long term and not just for this season. So if you're tanking, look for draft picks and look for guys that are younger and try to establish, especially your wide receiver room. I think it's the most important room in Dynasty to build. I think everybody else is you can figure out. So appreciate the question.
Absolutely. Well, Coach, week 2's in the books. Can't wait for Sunday. I can see you're in a hotel once again. Hope you have a safe trip back and really enjoyed the show.
No, hey, had a blast with you as always. Every other week, man, I'll be coming at you from a hotel, but I will be at home for the next 2 weeks. So that'll be good. I'll be able to do it from the comfort of my home. And then, of course, the following week, I'll be back out here in California at a hotel near you. So we'll
there you go.
See how it goes. Hey, wish everybody the best of luck in their matchups this week. Always reach out to us on Twitter. And we're part of the Yards Per team. I want to give them a huge shout out for having us on and doing the podcast for us. So go to the website at Yards Per. They've got a ton of great content on there. If you're looking for starting 6 questions, they offer that service as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We'll see you guys Sunday morning.
We'll see you, man.